welcome to Stoughton Politics with this guy. There are no guests in the studio today because now that I've had the chance to interview 3 Democratic candidates for Norfolk County District Attorney, I want to discuss what we've seen so far. In today's episode, I will be showing clips from my previous interviews. I edited these clips myself, using the same footage that aired in the full interviews. Those interviews are still available on SMAC's YouTube page, so you can check my work and make sure I'm not taking anyone's answers out of context. As always, the opinions I express are my own and do not reflect any leaning or bias on the part of SMAC. I am still undecided as a voter, and this race is also still taking shape. For instance, a new Democrat declared his candidacy in November while I was reviewing the footage I'll be showing you today. As such, my goal here is not to push you, the viewer, toward any one candidate. It's to make you a more informed voter and highlight some of the issues that I think matter the most. So let's meet these 3 candidates. The first to declare for office and the first I interviewed was Djuna Perkins. Here's how she described her credentials.
So my name is Djuna Perkins. A lot of people wonder about my name. I like to say that the D in my name is silent, but I am not. I was named after a writer who was active in the 1920s. She was American. Her parents just made it up. And my father was a writer, and he liked the author and the name, and so that's how I got it. And I was born in 1968, and this is what happens. Anyway, so for 32 years, I have, as a lawyer, I have helped hundreds of families all over Massachusetts get through some of the worst days of their lives. First, as a prosecutor, for 10 years, I was in the Attorney General's office in the Safe Neighborhood, under Scott Harshbarger, in the Safe Neighborhood Initiative, in Brockton District Court, in the Appeals Unit, and in the Narcotics and Special Investigations Unit. And after that, I went to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, where Ralph Martin was the district attorney, and I was in the domestic violence unit there. And in my last role there, I was the chief of the domestic violence unit, which meant I had oversight of all domestic violence cases in Suffolk County short of murder. And then when I left that, I also was the supervisor of the Dorchester District Court, and I was also involved in implementing a grant project that resulted in the Dorchester Domestic Violence Court. When I left there, I spent 10 years at a small firm in Boston representing crime victims in third-party litigation against institutions like the Catholic Church, colleges, camps, and other institutions, really revolving around childhood sexual abuse and discrimination and sexual harassment. During that time, I also represented the family of the victim of alleged Craigslist killer, Philip Markoff. And I also wrote an amicus brief to the Supreme Judicial Court about that helped preserve an important evidence rule in sexual assault cases. And then in 2012, I started my own practice where I focus on investigating misconduct and discrimination for schools and workplaces. So I've done over 150 investigations for schools, colleges, high schools, colleges, private schools, public schools, municipalities, police departments, for internal discipline. And so because of that, I've essentially spent my entire career working on the same kinds of crimes, or events, just in different settings, crimes that really cause the worst harm that you can imagine, and it comes from some of the worst behavior imaginable.
Perkins has the strongest prosecutorial resume, and I suspect that she's a very good lawyer. She certainly comes prepared. She's the only candidate who watched my show before coming on so that she'd know what she was getting into. As far as I could tell, neither of the other 2 watched my interview with Djuna to see what questions I asked her, though to be fair, Craig MacLellan did reach out to me a few weeks after we taped to continue the conversation and ask what I thought. Here's his description of his qualifications. Start us off with a little bit about your background. I understand you worked as a prosecutor in the Suffolk County DA's office for a time?
I did, yes. That was my first professional role after graduating from law school.
Oh, wow.
I was a prosecutor in Suffolk County for just shy of 10 years.
Okay.
And I worked in the Safe Neighborhood and Youth Violence unit in that office.
Okay.
And where we prosecuted crimes like, narcotics-related offenses, firearms-related offenses, shootings, things of that nature. And then from there, I moved to a different state agency called the Commission on Judicial Conduct.
Okay.
Where we were charged with investigating complaints or claims of misconduct against Massachusetts state judges.
Yeah.
And I stayed there for a fairly brief stint, about 2 years, and had some great coworkers there, and I enjoyed that role. Started having children, and so my official public service roles took a
Right.
brief respite, and I went to a law firm in Boston for some time, and then shortly thereafter, I established my own law practice where I began serving in part as a public bar advocate for indigent defendants in my local courthouse.
Excellent.
On the criminal defense side, and I volunteer as a school committee member on my town school committee.
Yes, I was going to ask about that because I see that you kind of wear many hats in Cohasset. So you're on the school committee. Are you on any other town? I feel like I saw you doing more than one thing in town government.
Yes, and that's partly goes hand in hand why I'm running for this position, right? I'm a big believer in public service and contributing to your community, and so school committee's been a labor of love. I absolutely adore being on the committee, and it's a total privilege and a total honor. I've done it for 7 years, so I'm in my third term now. But to answer your question, I'm involved in some other things in town. Yes, I serve on the steering committee for our Safe Harbor Coalition, which is to combat youth substance abuse, bring awareness to substance abuse and things of that nature in town. And it's a great organization because it's very much youth or student driven. There's a lot of student ambassadors involved in that organization, so I get to work with them. Kind of again intersects with my work on the school committee. And I also, I don't know if I will be the one to do it this year, but at least for the last 3 years and for the inaugural year, I was sort of in charge of the town's 4th of July celebration.
I interviewed our third candidate, Jim Barakat, more recently, but let's still refresh our memories about his background. Okay, well, let's start out with just a little bit of biography. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, thank you. So I grew up in Chicago, Illinois. Went to public schools in Chicago, was raised by a single mother. And then I went to college at Northern Illinois University for philosophy and political science. After that, that's when I found myself in Boston to go to law school at New England Law. And from there, kind of took off into this public service kind of employment. I started my role as a public defender defending children and families across Massachusetts for cases in which DCF enters their lives, Department of Children and Families, and as often happens when they enter your life, they remove a child or get involved in some other way. And as you know, you have a constitutional right to raise your family the way you deem fit. So when the child, yes, right. But when they have a child removed from you, right, that's a constitutional right that the state's infringing upon. So it's one of the few areas of civil law that actually get attorneys appointed. You have a right to counsel, and so for about 6 or 7 years, I did that, and for the last 5, I've been a public defender with the state agency and defending the indigent in district and superior courts in Massachusetts.
As I told Craig MacLellan on the phone, one of my major concerns when picking someone to run a big piece of the criminal justice system is the potential for abuse of power. All positions of power attract people who will abuse that power without exception. It's vital that we understand this about our criminal justice system, too. Getting punched or robbed or kidnapped isn't any less painful when the perpetrators are in uniform, nor should we dismiss victims who have previously been on the wrong side of the law. When I asked Jim Barakat to rant about a topic of his choice, he raised a really important point about how we as a society think about innocence, guilt, and violence.
Often, and it could be like a cocktail party or something like that, and someone will say, "Oh, what do you do?" And so I tell them what I do, and inevitably you get the how can you defend those people, and I think the rant is, people are innocent until proven guilty. A lot of courts sometimes forget that. A lot of people sometimes also forget that. We have a trial system for a reason. The 5th and 14th Amendments require, due process clause, and to that we have a right to a jury trial. We have essentially the right to not be labeled guilty until proven guilty. And it's like, for someone to say, how can you defend those people? It's like, to me, it's like they're saying, how can you uphold the Constitution of the United States?
Right.
So it's like this, that and things that are happening in town. You hear a lot. I got trolled on Twitter about not being more vocal about something about Trooper Michael Proctor, and part of that is what it is, but I also feel like Norfolk County, for example, is only in the news when something big happens. It's like if it's not Karen Reed, it's almost as like folks don't really care so much about it. For example, there's been 3 deaths at MCI Norfolk within the last month, and I feel like you don't hear about that at all in the news. The Norfolk County District Attorney's Office is investigating along with the Mass State Police, but we haven't heard. I mean, what was it? Medical? Was it? Did people get stabbed there? Was any staff involved? I mean, I think 3 murders. Well, I say murders; they could have died some other way, but 3 deaths within a month in any town is crazy. But it almost said it happens in a prison that they don't deserve the coverage it might otherwise get.
Now, maybe you think that once you're convicted or even just accused of a crime, you've forfeited your rights. There are lots of people who think that way. I personally don't. I think if you steal my car, what I need in order to be made whole is money and a car, not for you to be shanked in prison or beaten to a pulp, not for you to lose access to your asthma medication or your antidepressants or your right to talk to your family whenever you want to. I think our society is sick in its obsession with revenge and in its willingness to treat other people as disposable when someone says the magic words accusing them of a crime. So when I think of what I want in a DA, I want someone who is able to look beyond the books and consider not only the maximum sentence they can win, but the appropriate sentence to ask for. Djuna Perkins made an excellent point about the importance of the DA's office when I asked for her rant. Like, what is that for you?
Well, the role of the district attorney. I think that a lot of people think that if they are law-abiding, that who their district attorney is doesn't matter. And that they could not be more wrong for a bunch of reasons. First of all, the reason that you're so safe is because of, in large part, of who your district attorney is, who your police officers are, and who your neighbors are, and, whether or not they'll commit crime. But the decisions that the DA makes and the power that the district attorney has is tremendous. And even if you don't live in Norfolk County, you probably come to Norfolk County, and you probably have friends who live in Norfolk County. And by the way, crimes are prosecuted where they occur. So if something happens to you in Norfolk County, even if you don't live here, you're going to be coming to Norfolk County. And also, people don't know what the borders of the counties are. So if they have lost faith in one aspect of local government, which, everyone in Massachusetts knows about the Karen Reed case and the Sandra Birchmore case, which we haven't even talked about. Most people know about those cases, don't necessarily know they came from Norfolk County. So if they're thinking the government is really messed up, that taint from Norfolk County goes everywhere. And people lose faith in the institutions of government. And that is really dangerous for all aspects of local government. And now is the time, as you mentioned, that our local government institutions really need to be strong and we really need to stick together and make sure that we are giving ourselves justice and due process and holding people accountable for their behavior. So that is my, and I get really frustrated with people who say, well, I'm really focused on the federal issues right now because I want to scream and say, like, but this is what's going to protect you. What is here, what we do for each other right now, right here.
The DA's office is crucial not only to public safety, but also to public trust, which itself plays a huge role in public safety. Once people stop believing that the system can provide them with justice and safety, they start taking the law into their own hands, and things devolve quickly. So we need someone who can do 2 things at once: run a competent office that holds people accountable for crimes they commit, and run a humane office that doesn't measure its successes by the harshness of the penalties it wins. An issue made particularly stark by the Karen Reed and Sandra Birchmore cases is the relationship between the DA's office and local police. I think there's a balance that needs to be struck between a hostile relationship that would prevent both police and prosecutors from doing their jobs properly and total trust, which can be very dangerous in the opposite direction. So I asked all three candidates what they think is the appropriate relationship between the DA's office and local police. Let's start with Craig MacLellan's answer. I'm interested in what you see as the appropriate relationship to have with law enforcement.
Well, it's a close one, okay? A close one and a productive one. Again, I'm going to use the analogy that I have or to relate to my school committee experience, and that we have I mentioned this earlier, we have a really good relationship with our police department. So that is fundamental. You have to have that. And I understand why sometimes that leads people to believe that, the fix is in, or there's too many, there's too much politics involved, and there's a lack of objectivity that stems from that. Right. But if it's done in an open and transparent manner, right, people will not feel that way. I think that one of the things that I saw work well when I was a prosecutor is to have sort of a geographically targeted prosecution model where you have certain teams of your assistant DAs and your victim witness advocates and your investigators assigned to certain districts, right? So it's the same group of people. And then the community begins to know them because they are required to engage in outreach and attend community events. And so then there's that connection where people know who to contact with issues. The prosecutors in turn learn the community. So if there's a crime on a certain street or a certain store or something like that, the prosecutors know where it is. They can immediately envision the crime scene. It will give them a better understanding at arraignment of what was involved here. Regular meetings with the police departments will encourage collaboration and growth and partnership between the DA's office and the police departments. But you were asking specifically about the district attorney himself.
Yeah.
And I think that they go hand in hand. I mean, yes, I do believe in these teams being sort of the day-to-day connection. I mean, there's one district attorney, there's multiple departments. You can't be out there all the time, but the DA absolutely needs to have a great relationship with all of the police chiefs and department leadership, because they also have to trust the DA, right? And they are the ones with the most community knowledge. And, if there are issues within the police departments and they're confronting challenges, they're confronting some public dissent, I think that it's incumbent upon the DA to be involved and to collaborate with both the community and the departments on how to address it. You're going to run into challenges with public organizations, and you shouldn't shy away from it. But I certainly do not believe that the DA should take a hands-off approach because he is concerned that it's going to promote the appearance of a lack of objectivity, that they're buddy-buddy. I think you can absolutely have very valuable, healthy, productive, professional relationships without it becoming a personal relationship that makes everyone concerned that there's a problem with impartiality or objectivity.
Here's another relevant clip from earlier in our interview.
I am a firm believer that all of our DAs should be partnering with at least our public schools and collaborating with district leadership to deliver some programming that focuses on good decision making, weighing the consequences of one's actions before they become problematic. Yeah. Perhaps thinking about responsible management of our digital footprint and awareness of what happens when we send things out into the internet about ourselves or about others and the effects they can have. I actually tried to initiate this sort of discussion with the DA's office and the current administration, and it sort of fell off, which I think maybe lent itself to my fervor in running for this position. But so I'm a believer that there should be a collaboration between public safety, law enforcement, and the schools.
Okay.
And I'm proud to say that in Cohasset, we have an absolutely exceptional police department that has a really great connection with our schools and some great student resource officers. And so I would just be looking to build upon that in the other communities throughout Norfolk County.
Now the other two responses to the same question. What do you see as the proper relationship between the DA's office and local law enforcement?
Yeah. I like to think of it as the DA's office and the police ought to have it should be like a good friend, somebody who will have your back most of the time, but can also call you out on your crap when needed. Because it's a very delicate relationship. The DA's office doesn't supervise the police, but they have to work with them and they have to rely on them for the evidence that they present to court. But the evidence that but it's the DA who is ultimately responsible for presenting solid evidence to court that is that it was obtained ethically. Otherwise, their own license is on the line. So it can be a fraught relationship. It should be a collaborative one. Obviously, police do incredibly important and incredibly difficult work, and so do DAs. So I think each role is incredibly important and deserves respect both ways. And each needs to know how to stay in their own lane for the most part, and only intervene when it's really critical to keeping the relationship going.
So what is your approach then to police misconduct and investigations and or prosecution thereof?
Mm-hmm. So I mentioned that my first ever legal research assignment was, whether or not the Boston police could be prosecuted for their behavior in shaking down young black men in Boston after the murder of Carol Stewart. Also, in my second summer of law school, I interned at the Manhattan DA's office in the Public Integrity Division. So my job there was I was listening to wiretap tapes over and over of public officials committing misconduct. And so my approach is, if there is misconduct, it needs to be dealt with. So in terms of the Norfolk DA's office specifically, there is a state police unit that is assigned to help. They're in the same building down the hall. And I've had that experience before when I was in the AG's office. We had a state trooper unit that worked physically in the same location. That can be tricky because they're people that you're socializing with too. And so, are you really able to separate those two things? I think one thing with that unit is anyone who worked under, first of all, I think that the community has completely lost trust in the DA's office and in that state police unit.
Right.
I think that there's good signs coming out of the state police in general with Colonel Noble. And he's made some good changes, including replacing the previous commander. I think, but when I get there, one thing, so the DA doesn't hire those state police, but they can certainly say to the colonel, give me somebody else. I don't like that person. They're presenting me bad evidence or whatever it is, or I just don't like their attitude. Please send me somebody else. And so I think that anyone who worked under the previous commander, because I think there's a new one now, really I would want to ask to be replaced, even if they maybe they did nothing wrong at all. I just think the community needs that fresh, a clean slate to start with. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, we cannot tolerate evidence that is not legally obtained. We cannot tolerate discovery that is not timely produced or completely produced, because I don't want me or the people who work for me getting in trouble for what the police did. And also, it's just wrong. So I would certainly either, if it was not a conflict, certainly have no problem prosecuting it, myself within our office or referring it to somebody who would, whether that's the AG's office or another county or the feds.
What do you see as the proper relationship between the DA's office and law enforcement?
Well, I mean, I know they need to work in tandem to work. The police departments file criminal complaints, and it is in the discretion of the district attorney's office to follow up on those complaints. I think it's a huge power and responsibility that essentially goes unchecked to have prosecutorial discretion to say, oh, I'm not gonna bring that case. We know you charged it, we know you arrested someone, but we're not gonna bring that to court and potentially, in many cases, ruin someone's life or livelihood. In other cases, it's it's very incumbent to bring these cases for public safety. And I think if you take a hands-off approach with the police, which could have its benefits, I guess, but you're not gonna get the quality of evidence maybe you might expect to say like, wow, that office is really doing a great job.
Personally, of the three candidates, I think I prefer Djuna Perkins' answer to this question. She spent more than twice as long answering the question than her rivals did, and I got the impression she's thought a lot about it. She's worked both as an assistant DA and in internal investigations of police officers, and she clearly has experience with the good, the bad, and the ugly of law enforcement. That's not to say that I hated the other candidates' answers, just that I thought hers was the best. You may disagree. For that matter, I might rewatch this and disagree with myself. For better and worse, I'm a fairly persuadable person, and a stray comment or strong analysis from someone will often change my mind entirely. In terms of overall approach to the office of DA, the candidates clearly have differences there too. Craig MacLellan made a point of emphasizing that the DA's office should be more dynamic and more public-facing than it currently is.
We need to elect a DA who is going to inject some enthusiasm and some energy and some innovation, and just demonstrate a genuine commitment to the residents that they serve. That's going to go a long way, and that's part of my vision. I mean, I'm going to approach this role from a community-centric, service-oriented perspective. When I say we need to reimagine how the office serves the public, I want you to imagine an office where the DA comes out to Stoughton. It says, hey, Stoughton, we're going to have a series of public safety forums, okay? Everyone's invited, and we'll have a general agenda where we're going to talk about crime statistics or criminal trends in Stoughton. What types of crimes are happening? Where are they happening? What are the arrest rates currently, conviction rates currently? What do we think the root causes of these issues are?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we're going to propose some programs or initiatives or policies that we think will target those root causes and serve to eradicate those crimes in the community. But before we do that, we're just proposing them to you.
Right.
So that you can tell us, as residents of Stoughton, whether you think that makes sense or you think some different iteration of that makes sense. And then once we all agree on a potential solution, because we won't know until it's in practice, we'll roll that out. And then that won't be the last time you hear from us. We're going to come back in 6 or 9 or 12 or 18 months, whatever makes sense. And we're going to come back and we're going to address the same criminal statistics and trends and look at the same areas and decide together if this is working. And if it is, great, we're going to stay on that path. If it's not, then let's decide together how we're going to pivot to start making a difference and start making a dent in this. That is called accountability.
I'm going to oversimplify your position, and you're going to tell me why it's wrong,
Sure.
okay? I'm going to say, okay, you believe in the DA's office having a different approach to each community based on what people in the community have told the DA's office they want. So as a consequence, the law will be enforced differently in Quincy than it is in Stoughton.
Yeah, so it's not going to be enforced differently, right? The approach will be different. The policies may be different. The attention paid to the individual crimes may be different, right? The engagement, the community may be different. I think it's more about the community may have an interest, more of an interest in hearing about, again, we'll use that retail-centric community.
Yes.
They've expressed a defined interest in crimes of shoplifting, where there's another community that is seeing a Melnea Cass situation where there's a lot of open drug use, right? That doesn't mean that in the shoplifting community, we're saying, hey, everyone, we're not prosecuting drug crimes here, right? It just means that you wanted to hear about shoplifting, our arrest rates, our conviction rates, what we're doing about it, build some programming around it to eradicate that type of crime here in this area. And in here, same thing with the narcotics-related crimes, right? But it doesn't mean that we're not prosecuting shoplifting over here, or that we're even enforcing the narcotics crimes differently than we're doing it here. Okay. There just may be some defined programming that's targeting those types of crimes in a certain community.
Okay. While Djuna Perkins did not suggest any innovative new initiative, she was clear in her intention to clean up Michael Morrissey's mess and professionalize the office, not just by apologizing to the public for prior missteps, as MacLellan suggested, but also by making significant changes to staffing and internal culture. I didn't get the impression that Jim Barakat had thought quite as thoroughly about how he would staff his office or interact with other government agencies, but he clearly had thought about what sort of changes to policy he would make. At one point, I asked about former Suffolk County DA Rachel Rollins and her approach to declaring certain low-level offenses unprosecutable as a class. Of the three candidates, only Barakat showed any interest in taking a similar approach. Here's what he had to say. Do you have a similar approach? Are there any crimes that you feel like, okay, this is on the book, it's illegal, but I'm not going to prosecute people for this?
I mean, I think there's definitely there's so many crimes on the book that never get charged. If you Google Massachusetts master crime list, you can see them all too. And it's in a PDF form. And sometimes I go through it and go, what is that? Like that is crazy. I've never seen that. And sometimes you'll see a charge in a charge document. You'll say, well, I didn't even know that was on the books. Like something like your tires on your car extend more than 1 inch past the frame of your car. And that's a criminal. It will be a civil complaint, but a lot of these things like disorderly conduct or disturbing the peace, a lot of them, while they are criminal offenses, they don't have the penalty of incarceration. So often some of these folks come in and they don't even get appointed a lawyer, and very often it gets dismissed on court costs, but there is always that, because it's technically a criminal charge, that little entry on their criminal record. You were charged with that. Well, not just Rachel Rollins, but Larry Krasner in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and former DA of Cook County, Chicago, where I'm from, Kim Fox. These progressive DAs have kind of rolled out this, we're not going to charge this. Hard to say, but I think there's certainly a lot of crimes that need to be viewed at through a different lens. Personally, non-violent misdemeanors that also don't end in some sort of pecuniary property damage, something like that. I mean, those are very suspect to me. I mean, to give someone a criminal history, based on something like that. I mean, low-level drug possession. Certainly, we need to get drugs off of the street. But to criminalize someone who has an addiction, honestly, it's not moral. I don't find it ethical either. And on the books, they differentiate between just simple possession and possession with the intent to distribute, whether it's they have the instruments to distribute that drug on them, or that they have an amount so big that it's like there's no way this person is using that for personal use. And that's always where it gets caught up in court. But you see it again and again, drug possession, and it comes back, and it's like, well, they have probation as part of maybe their first deal, and probation is stay drug free, and there's not many programs to help them be drug free, and it's just the cycle, and then you get a judge who might, enough was enough, or they're very conservative and say, no, drugs, you're going to jail.
Yes.
And I don't think that helps anyone.
As a fellow admirer of reformist DAs like Larry Krasner, I appreciated this answer. I know Rachel Rollins was an extremely controversial figure, but I personally thought her approach in Suffolk County was a necessary reset of expectations. Importantly, a study found that the moratorium on prosecuting nonviolent misdemeanors led to no increase in crime whatsoever and actually reduced people's likelihood to reoffend. Not everyone approved her approach or of her personally. Her tenure was very controversial. Here's Craig MacLellan's answer on Rollins specifically.
So I think that I'd agree with former DA Rollins' general sentiment and where she was coming from, the impetus behind that, right? Okay, the problem was the approach and execution there, in my opinion, right? So I have never served as a DA to date. I've been an assistant DA, and I have not been a U.S. attorney, and so I'm talking about, and I don't want to appear critical of someone else's administration. It's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about what I would bring, but I'm going to give you you just asked me, so I'm going to give you my perspective on what is different about that than my vision.
Yeah.
Because there are some similarities. Because what she was doing there was she was saying that she believes that her community felt that they were being, I think, unfairly targeted by those crimes and prejudiced by, arrests and prosecutions of those nature.
For sure.
She had
more or less the data to back it up, too.
A minority-laden community, okay? And then you look at the data, right? And I think that's where she sort of developed that perspective.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of goes in hand what I'm talking about. She was trying to be reflective of the will of the community. I think where that went wrong, because she did confront a lot of, I think, dissent and controversy around that, was the lack of, I think, deliberation in the rollout. She was a brand new DA, and I think it was taking and again, this is my personal opinion, okay? So
absolutely,
I'm entitled to it just like anyone else, but I'm not saying it's the right thing. I'm just giving you my thoughts. I think she took what could be characterized as a new sheriff in town approach.
Absolutely.
She was dealing with Suffolk County is a unique county when you're talking about DA's office because it's predominantly BPD, Boston Police Department, is not the only department, but it is pretty much the department you're dealing with.
It is.
And as you know, it is a well-entrenched organization and institution.
Absolutely.
So coming in as a newly elected official, who isn't a career law enforcement officer, and telling superintendents and commissioners what's what, or local police captains at the district level, that wasn't, I don't think that was received well, and so there was problems with the rollout there, and then I think allowed critics to latch onto that too, and it was just I think it just wasn't slow enough and deliberate enough, and I think it lacked the patience of what a successful program would have.
As I told Craig in our later phone call, I thought his analysis didn't take into account the possibility that the reaction to Rollins could have had at least a little something to do with racial and gender animus, and might have been identical regardless of how quickly she moved. To me, the conversation brought to mind the passage in Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail, where he wrote, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, 'I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action,' who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection." To be clear, I'm not saying that Rachel Rollins' approach as Suffolk DA was flawless and that better isn't possible. I do, however, think that Dr. King was right to criticize people who say, "I agree with you, but you're moving too fast." Sometimes fast is the only way to move. Though I didn't name Rachel Rollins in my interview with Djuna Perkins, it was clear from our conversation that Perkins is not interested in putting any given offense categorically off limits for prosecution. I'll add that in many ways I learned from my interview with Djuna Perkins how to better hone my questions in general. When asking about her approach to the use of questionable evidence in court, I gave examples that turned out to already not be permissible as evidence, and it was only because of her informative answer that I was able to ask a better worded question of the other two candidates. So are there any sort of like categories of evidence that you would say, we're not using this? Like this is not meaningful, and we should not be telling a jury that it's meaningful when it's not.
So most of the examples I would think of would like polygraphs. Those are actually not accepted in court. In order to present scientific evidence to court, there's a whole process that you have to go through first to prove that this is generally scientifically accepted evidence. It's called the Daubert test, and you have to prove that, I think it's like that, not only is there a scientific basis, but also that the science is accepted in the respective peer community. And then usually there's a examination of the witness, and then the judge decides, okay, I believe, this meets the standard, and so yes, you can testify, or no, you can't. So polygraphs are one that people often talk about. People who have watched crime shows have often talked about. And they're like, well, I'll take a polygraph test. We're like, well, actually, it doesn't really matter because polygraphs are kind of useless. I don't know why anybody uses them, but they're certainly not acceptable in court. DNA is one, obviously that is in generally a good one.
Right.
But that's also fairly complicated, I think, depending on the kind of test and how they do it and all that. So I guess I would say the short answer is there's nothing that I can think of that comes to mind that categorically I wouldn't use, but definitely if it's not supported, if it doesn't meet those scientific tests, like if it isn't scientifically accepted in the community, then no, I would not.
I asked the other two candidates specifically about forms of evidence that are permissible, but which they don't think should be used.
I've always, as a criminal defense attorney, always looked at the OUI, the operating on the influence cases, drunk driving cases,
yeah.
Right? The breathalyzers, right? There's this magic box that someone blows into, and it tells you whether you're drunk or not.
Sure.
I mean, I don't know that I really buy that, especially because the breathalyzer machines themselves have been under scrutiny in recent years, and it's just, whether they're calibrated correctly, whether it's so. It's just, however, you present something like that to a jury, and I think the average citizen is going to say, well, this machine, it's
right.
It tells you whether, and so it's fairly damning evidence, right?
Right.
But I'm not going to sit here and say that I would never, as a DA,
right,
I would instruct my assistants to not utilize breathalyzer evidence if it was taken, right?
Right.
But I don't know if I've had many. There's cases where you move to suppress breathalyzer results because they have to, and I don't know whether you know this or not. Probably the average person doesn't if they don't do this for a living. But there has to be a 15-minute observation period of the person before they take the breathalyzer test to ensure that they're not introducing any sort of foreign contaminants to their mouth or belching or anything that could adversely impact the integrity of the test.
Okay.
And so defense attorneys, they move to suppress if they think that, like, say, a booking video or something shows that. Well, maybe the prosecutor can be proactive. You don't have to, basically force the defense attorney to do that.
Are there kinds of evidence where you say, like, yeah, I know that if we're prosecuting this case and we really want to get a conviction, we can maybe use this. But if what we're interested in is justice and finding the right person who really did this, and certainly not ruining the life of someone who didn't really do this, like, I don't think we should be using this kind of evidence, even if it could win us the conviction.
Right, and it's interesting. I'd probably be the worst eyewitness on a witness stand. I could meet someone 3 or 4 times, and it takes me a while to really remember them. I think it's something I got going on with memory and faces, and hair color, and eye color. But you see it time and time again. I think the majority of cases from, like, the Innocence Project that get overturned are faulty eyewitness. They end up recanting their eyewitness testimony years later, saying, I felt pressured, I never actually saw this guy. And then it always kind of comes into scrutiny, shouldn't we use it, right? I don't think it's ever going to go away. But I had read somewhere, and a lot of the science says every time, whether it's like you're remembering your last birthday party or whether it's something that happened 2 weeks ago, every time you remember that event, you're actually not remembering the event. You're remembering the last time you remembered the event. And so,
yeah, there's like a difference between memory and imagination.
Right. So in a situation where you might retell the story like 8 or 9 times, whether that's to investigators, police, pre-trial statements, then on the stand, your memory gets worse as time goes on. I think that's just a fact generally, right? You know, I'm not going to remember what I had for breakfast this morning a week from now, but I can tell you I had honey smacks, right, for breakfast today. And but I don't see eyewitness testimony ever going away.
Yeah.
I've been reading a lot into GSR, gunshot residue, which is the more I see about it is that it can go either way. They arrest someone that they have great probable cause and reasonable belief that they discharged the firearm, and they test their hands, and there's no gunshot residue, right? And I guess that could happen. But also there's cases where someone who just discharged a gun can transfer that gunshot residue to somebody else, and they know this person didn't shoot a gun, but gunshot residue showed up. So I think evidence like that, when it can go either way.
Yeah, where there's both false positives and false negatives.
What point does it, I think it just goes to show at some point somewhere somebody came into contact with someone who may have shot a gun.
Right.
I think they can use the ballistics to show that a gun was discharged without ever using the gunshot residue.
I really appreciated all 3 of these answers, and I appreciate Djuna Perkins for being my first interview subject in this race, even if it means my questions to her weren't as well honed as the later ones. I did ask all 3 candidates about their thoughts on prosecuting crimes of civil disobedience, and I found points of disagreement with all 3. Djuna Perkins indicated much greater willingness to prosecute people for protesting than I'd expected. See for yourself.
Every case is different, and so one thing I think that is really tough is whenever a prosecutor, I'm always suspicious of any prosecutor who says, I will never prosecute X, I will always prosecute Y.
Okay.
Because if you say that, there's always a situation that's going to come up and make the rule look stupid. Always. So really what you have to do is look at each specific case. So let's say you take a protest and the person is truly not being violent. They're just, displaying their poster. They've got a permit. They've done all the things they're supposed to do. And then they randomly get arrested. That does not look like a prosecution to me. But if they're at this protest and they take their sign and they whack someone in the head with it, that's a crime. If they are at this protest and they are going up to people and making threatening or intimidating comments or something like that, that's a crime. So there's civil disobedience and there's expressing yourself. I think it's fine to mostly say, you can even, by the way, there's a series of, oftentimes I've seen cases where police arrest people for disorderly conduct when really what the person did was swear at the police officer. You can swear at the police officer. That's totally cool. Not cool, but because it's not nice, but I mean, it's not a crime. So there's a difference between that and saying, I'm going to kill you or your family, or, saying something like that because you believe in X, Y, Z. That is definitely a crime. I believe
you brought up, having a permit for a protest. And of course, many protests are spontaneous and are done without a permit, right?
I suppose that's true.
When was it like 8 years ago when the supposed Muslim ban of people at airports, and people were getting detained at airports, and all of a sudden people were showing up to airports and protesting there, right? That presumably they did not get permits first, and yet that was a legitimate protest, right? And a legitimate form of protest. So I guess what I'm interested in teasing out is the ways in which in which the legal system of saying, well, X is a crime, it is kind of providing a cop-out for prosecuting things that should be our rights, right?
Well, I mean, so let's look at your airport example. So a group of people spontaneously start protesting in the airport. I think it's fine, I would not say that is a crime unless it interfere, because disorderly conduct basically is interfering with other people's rights to do stuff. So if you're in a space that isn't interfering with people's access to like the security gate or the bathroom or whatever, or you're not interfering with the business of the airport, I think that's fine. That isn't disorderly conduct. But let's say even if you say that it did interfere with some aspect of the airport, and so the person gets arrested for disorderly conduct.
You're blocking a bridge.
You're right, exactly. Those
marching
people.
across the highway, like, you know,
those people. I mean, so there's a couple things. When you, as a prosecutor, when you look at that case, you're saying, okay, does this person have a record? What exactly did they do, and how bad was it? What is the typical offense? What is the typical penalty for disorderly conduct? And does that work here? Do we think that, you know, in these circumstances, it's not really, first of all, disorderly conduct is not really that big of a crime. So it's kind of considered a minor crime. And that is where most of this would fall into if it wasn't violent or threatening or anything like that. Most protest cases would fall into there. A lot of those cases get dismissed anyway on payment of a fine. They're fairly minor crimes. So you have that discretion to look at all the circumstances and say, okay, this one wasn't, you know, this one wasn't really.
I think I've heard of DAs, you know, in some locations who have said, I will not prosecute disorderly conduct, right? If it's combined with some other more meaningful crime, then sure, I'll give it a look. But disorderly conduct is just not a thing I will prosecute because, you know, standing on its own, it means nothing aside from you've inconvenienced me and I'm mad about it.
Well, it depends on who you inconvenience. Like, let's say it's a store owner, and that makes its a small business owner who makes its livelihood selling stuff in their store, right? And the protest is happening in front of their store all day long, so people can't come in and buy from them. And, you know,
but it's not a protest of their store.
Correct. I mean, it's not fair. I mean, it's not fair to them. And let's say they get upset, they lose business. Even if it is a protest of their store, I'm not sure. Yeah, you have to. The point is that you have to weigh all of the factors. You can't just say, you can't just say I will never prosecute this.
Right.
But I can say that I would not overpunish. Overpunishing and punishing people who didn't do anything wrong are incredibly wrong. I mean,
yeah. I don't want to go overboard and mischaracterize Perkins's approach to protesters as let's lock them all up. She was very clear that she does not believe in overpunishing for minor crimes. But she did express at least an openness to prosecuting people for a pretty wide variety of civil disobedience situations. If you're willing to consider lost business the kind of harm that might justify prosecution, where does that end? The so-called Tesla takedown protests led to plummeting sales for that company. Are we going to say it's reasonable to prosecute people for waving signs in front of a Tesla dealership? If Djuna Perkins becomes our district attorney, I hope she reconsiders that approach. Craig MacLellan had a similar approach in many ways, expressing a willingness to prosecute potential public safety threats that went beyond the outright violence that we all agree can't be ignored. As you will see, he mentioned impacting traffic as a possible offense to be dealt with and emphasized pre-planning with local law enforcement. Where do you draw the line between First Amendment rights being absolutely vital and, kind of throwing the book at protesters?
Well, first of all, I don't think that the other end of that spectrum would be, quote unquote, throwing the book. There may be some action taken, right? But who knows what? There's a whole spectrum of different levels of action that one can take. But the short answer to the question is safety. When there's a threat to public safety, that's when you need to act. And I think that, those can be anticipated fairly well. And again, if there's good partnerships with the departments and good partnerships with various organizations in the community, then there may be some collaboration ahead of time where we were able to anticipate some problems like, road closures or things that might aggravate folks or get, incense the situation a bit. And so I think planning can go a long way with that and collaboration, but it's the short answer is safety. When the public safety is at risk, that is when action needs to be taken. But action that is, appropriately proportionate to the safety risk. Right?
Excellent.
If people are running around with assault rifles, that is an extreme situation, right?
Yeah.
If people are, walking maybe off the sidewalk in the street, that's a threat to public safety. People could get hit by cars. It could cause motorists to swerve and hit other cars. Okay, but perhaps it doesn't require, some sort of severe response with, armed police coming in and forcibly taking down residents, right?
And presumably, if people are actually blocking a street, then we're not increasing the risk of a car swerving because the car's not going anywhere.
It's true. So I think that all of that needs to be taken into consideration. I think that our country is based in part on civil disobedience.
Absolutely.
I think we can't forget where we came from. So that's an important, I think that's like an important thread in our history. But at the same time, you need to make sure everyone's safe. I mean, that is paramount. And I think that is the determining factor, and that's the answer.
Okay. Lastly, here's Jim Barakat's answer. What is your overall approach to charging protesters?
Right, and I think not too many months ago, it was like L.A. was in the news all the time because it seemingly that the streets were on fire during the night and throughout the day, and the police were having such a hard time. But I think that's a very important question. I think it's important even more so now. I know there's been a lot of No Kings protests happening. To my knowledge, the ones around Boston have been somewhat civil, but doesn't come certainly without some sort of arrests. But I think it's also important because this is where it gets really deep into the politics of, are you electing a Democratic district attorney or are you going to elect a Republican district attorney? I don't find that the Democratic Party is almost ever aligned with, say, President Donald Trump, but and a lot of these protests are either about him or about some of his policies. And I'm not saying the federal government is the only thing people are protesting, right? But in this day and age, it seems like that's been what's the most protested. And, you don't want to give the impression that you're not going to prosecute anything. If there's property crimes, if there's, crimes one-on-one, protesters clashing and they get into some sort of fist fight that neither of them consented to or one party didn't consent to, then, I think you got to do something about that. But yeah, to need a permit to protest, I mean, I think that's what protest is there for. I don't need a permit to, but you want to make sure who you're electing is aligned with your values. And if you elect a Republican district attorney who, I don't know any that have entered the race yet, are they going to be tough on? Are they going to be, lock them all up?
I'm not going to subject you to the full rant I went into there, which covered immigration policy as well as criminal law. I do want to be clear to anyone watching, though, that it is not enough to simply say, well, I'll be voting for the Democrat next November, and I can trust that any Democrat will have an approach to this topic that matches my own. That is simply not the case. Democratic policy on criminal justice has run the gamut from reformist takes on prosecutorial discretion all the way to self-congratulatory mass incarceration. There were pretty significant differences in approach even just among the 3 Democratic candidates I interviewed. That's all for today's roundup. I want to encourage everyone to watch all 3 interviews in their entirety, as all 3 interviews were fascinating and covered much more than I've been able to touch on today. I've already reached out to our newest candidate, Adam Deach, and hope to interview him sometime in the new year. Till next time.
Come on, sugar. Woo!